You've done the healing work, but why do you still feel so emotionally triggered, then act in a way you know probably isn't the best? If this is you, you are normal, and we're going to talk about why you still feel emotionally triggered despite all the work you've done and what you can do about it. Welcome back to Dating Intentionally. I'm Talia. I'm a dating coach, and I'm sharing no nonsense advice for navigating modern dating with confidence and ease, whether you've been on dozens of dates or you're just getting started. I believe dating can be fun, and sometimes it can just be really triggering. Real quick, before we get into it, if you're new here, thank you so much for being here. If we haven't already connected on Instagram, you can follow me there or on TikTok at dating.intentionally. I read pretty much all my DMs and answer as many as I can, and I love hearing from you. Also, you can now watch these episodes ad free on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe and follow and do all the things wherever you listen so you don't miss new episodes. And it really helps me grow the show. So thank you. You can find links to Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube below. Today, we're going to get into managing feeling triggered in your relationship and in the early dating stages, but mostly relationship stuff. And at the end, I'm going to have some more wedding updates for you. I got a lot of questions on Instagram and I'll be answering them, so stay tuned. Let's get into it. So maybe you're in therapy, maybe you've taken other paths to healing, or maybe you've read all the books and listened to all the podcasts and you're journaling your way to healing past wounds. Whatever it is, you're doing the work the best way you know how. And if you can hear Coconut snoring, I am so sorry. She's underneath my desk snoring. Anyway, just when you think you've got it, boom, something comes along or something happens and it completely sets you back and makes you feel like you have never spent a moment trying to heal your past wounds, trauma, attachment style, whatever. It's really frustrating, right? I've been there and I am not a therapist. None of these episodes can replace therapy, so just keep that in mind as you listen. I'm speaking from experience working with several therapists at this point, doing a ton of research, reading, and solo work, as well as work with my fiance, Johnny, honestly. We've worked together on healing some of these triggers and managing them and all that. I've talked a little bit about this before on Instagram and here on the podcast, but I think I felt more triggered, emotionally triggered in my relationship after officially becoming a couple than anything else. And really, honestly, every new milestone in my relationship has reopened some past wounds. So when I say triggered, by the way, I mean the moment when you're experiencing something that makes you feel flooded with emotion. Maybe that emotion is anger, sadness, stress, or something you can't quite put your finger on. Or you might feel out of control, abandoned, helpless, or overwhelmed. That experience or moment that makes you feel that way could really be anything. It just depends on what you've gone through. So, I have two examples that are not connected to relationships just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So, I grew up in a Jewish household, and my grandparents were pretty religious, and we'd spend a lot of high holidays there, like Passover, especially. And I remember as an adult, okay, I was like 24, walking into a Seder, which is a Passover dinner, hosted by acquaintances, so people I didn't know very well. And it was like a really big event. There were lots of people. This was a situation where the dining table went through the entire house. Like it was like a bunch of tables connected. And the second I saw that white tablecloth covered by a plastic tablecloth with like the styrofoam or paper plates and like plastic silverware, I panicked. It just brought up these feelings of being stuck at Seder's as a kid, and I knew I had to leave. It was just like this immediate gut reaction of like, I cannot be here right now. And that happened almost 10 years ago. Now I would have handled that a little differently, but that was a moment where I knew I felt extremely triggered. And by the way, it's not like anything really traumatic happened to me at Passover dinners as a kid. I just really did not like them. So here's another example that is not related to romance or relationships, just to show you what I'm talking about. Growing up, I was a horrible test taker. It stressed me out so much. Like, I remember crying in grade school when taking a test. And in high school, I used to literally take a test off my desk, walk over to the trash, throw it in in the trash, and walk out the door. I was that student. So I remember a few years ago voting in the mail. It was like in Seattle, so it's like mail in voting. And there was something about filling in the bubbles that made it feel like a test, and I got so overwhelmed, I started crying, and I was panicking. I just didn't wanna vote. I was like, "You know what? I'm not doing this, like, I don't get it." There was just so much pressure, and fortunately, in that moment, my ex was able to calm me down, and we did it together, But that is like a was a huge click moment for me, like, "Oh my god, it's not I wasn't feeling that way because of voting. I felt that way because it reminded me of my experiences taking tests growing up, and that's why I was having that reaction." So those are just two examples of how things from our past can cause us to react and have certain emotions in our present. And we all have this. It's a very human thing. Things are wired into us from a very young age. So now my relationship, I felt really emotionally triggered a few times, more often than I'd like to admit, honestly. And it usually has little or nothing to do with my fiance, but everything to do what feels like a familiar, bad, or emotional experience or how I'm interpreting it. For me, in my relationship, I'm the most triggered when in conflict because I haven't had much healthy communication or healthy conflict in my life. It's been better in the past few years with family and friends and in my relationship for sure. But the majority of my experience growing up and in college and after was not great. You know, most of that experience includes me trying to work through conflict with people who put me down, stonewalled me, gave me the silent treatment, acted out and heightened the conflict, or just got really defensive to the point where I'm the one apologizing, even though the conversation did not start out that way. So you can imagine how conflict doesn't really feel safe for me. I am very conflict avoidant. Here's an example of a spiral that will happen once I am triggered in conflict. So it starts with getting to the conflict. That's a trigger. The second I hear any defensiveness, I go into freeze or flight mode. That means I either shut down and don't say anything and don't make eye contact, or I want to remove myself from the conversation, which looks like leaving the room. Those are the two things that will hopefully make me feel safe in that moment. That's how my body is reacting to get to safety. So then what happens is because you can't move forward in conflict when the other person is shutting down or leaving the room, right? So what would end up happening is I would hang on to a lot of resentment and I would start making an escape plan in my head because I'm like, wow, this person's getting defensive. There's no way forward. There's no way I can reason with this person. They're just going to defend themselves. It's pointless. Like that's like the narrative that goes in my head. So I start making an escape plan to leave the relationship. Because in this triggered state, my mind can't fathom the idea of working through something. It only wants to escape. So the second it gets hard, my wounded parts are telling me to run. There's no chance. It's doomed. I gotta go. And notice I said wounded parts because I'm not defined by these parts. They're just part of me and my history. Anyway, then the spiral leads me to look for more clues and more reasons and more evidence the relationship won't work. And you can probably figure out how bad that is for a relationship, right? If one partner is constantly looking for reasons it won't work, that's all they're going to see. So, have you ever gone down a spiral like that? What happens to you? You don't have to share, but I'm just curious if you want to think about that. What does your spiral look like? What does that narrative look like? What's the well traveled path in your mind, right? Now, imagine if I had not done any work on myself and I was going through this emotional experience every time there was a hint of conflict or defensiveness. I would probably end up acting on my feelings and either sabotaging the relationship in some way or I'd leave. Or I'd keep avoiding conflict at the point where I'd be so disconnected from my partner or super resentful, which will kill a relationship. Luckily, I've done a lot of work. So let's get into how to manage this feeling of being triggered in dating and relationships. The first step is awareness. I'm sure there are several paths to discovering triggers, but what worked for me was reflecting on moments when I felt particularly emotionally activated and asking myself, why is this feeling familiar? When in my life have I felt this? Who was I with? Where was I? This reflection can be done after the fact or in the moment when you are having this reaction. And a lot of us have existing raw spots and emotional wounds. It might even be safe to say that everyone does, and if you don't think you do, then either you're lucky or you've just suppressed a lot of your emotions for most of your life. Becoming aware of these raw spots and wounds is so important, not only to know for yourself, but also to be able to communicate them to your partner eventually. This is not first date conversation material. This is not early dating conversation material. This is stuff you talk about months and months in after a lot of trust and security has been established, when you know the relationship is worth working on, and after you've been triggered and you know that this is a thing, right? It's one thing to have enough self trust to explore your past wounds, where they come from, and how they affect your relationships today. And it's a whole other thing to be able to share that information with someone. And my hope is that you eventually find someone who you trust enough to listen with care and understanding because that's what you deserve. And of course, I hope that you can do the same thing for them. Another really important aspect of awareness is being in your body, being present in your body. And it took me years working with a therapist to learn how to check in with my body to figure out where these emotions existed physically, right? Chest, stomach, neck, those are shoulders, hips, these are common areas where you will feel your emotions like physically. So, what does that look like? What does it look like to check in with your body? Well, it looks like pausing and doing a mental body scan, right? You're like just kind of focusing on your body. You're asking yourself, what feels tight? What feels tense, hot, cold, jittery, heavy? Where is the energy? And where are these sensations located physically in your body? And our bodies tell us a lot, especially when it comes to how we feel. And if you're not used to tapping into your emotions, tapping into your body first will help you a lot. I get it. I'm someone who defaults into intellectualizing my feelings instead of feeling them, and it's taken me a long time to get to learn how to do this. I used to only do it with my therapist when she told me to, and now I can just do it in my day to day. It takes practice. Being able to connect with my emotions and feel them and be in my body helped me realize just how deep certain words and actions hurt me in my current relationship and when I had certain reactions. Emotions aren't something to be scared of. They're just information. And while emotions are real and valid, it's important to acknowledge them. We don't always have to act on them. And that's what brings me to the next thing I want to share. So, first, when I was learning to manage my triggers, I would act out. Sometimes feeling emotions is scary, it's uncomfortable, like it's out of nowhere, or like it's too much to handle. And I don't know about you, but for most of the time, for most of my life, when I felt certain things, I acted out to get attention, connection, to feel safe again, even if that meant doing something that made matters worse or was kind of confusing or would cause even more conflict. So, acting out can look like so many different things: withdrawing, shutting down, picking a fight about something random or irrelevant, being hot and cold to get attention. While this maybe got me some attention from my partner, it didn't make us closer or bring any new understanding to the relationship. It's like, let's look at this mess over here and let me get your attention while ignoring the bigger mess over here that we need to focus on. That's kind of what acting out is like. And there have been moments in my relationship where I'll feel triggered. And instead of just saying what was going on, I would pick a fight or withdraw to get my fiance's attention because that felt less scary than just saying how I felt and what I was fearing in that moment, what I was afraid of, what angered me, right? That's so vulnerable. Eventually, I tried something different. After working on and building a lot of trust with my fiance, I can now calmly tell him when I'm feeling triggered and why I'm feeling that way, what he did or said, and how it affects me. It's still scary sometimes. I don't like doing it. It's uncomfortable, but I know that it will lead to more connection and understanding because my fiance is an open, empathetic, and understanding person. Maybe he can't relate to most of the things I'm talking about in these moments, but he can still see that I'm in pain, and that's enough. The other part of this shift is knowing and internalizing that your partner probably doesn't want to hurt you. They're definitely going to do things that will trigger you and hurt you in your relationship, but it's hopefully never intentional, just like you would never do anything intentionally to hurt them. This is not the same thing as letting them off the hook completely. They're still accountable for their actions and words and their impact. But understanding this is more about understanding that you're on the same team. They don't want to have the impact of hurting you. Their intention was not to hurt you, that even if the impact was that you felt hurt by what they said or did, if it triggered you, all that stuff. So let's talk about why it works to share when triggers happen versus acting out. The first thing is letting my fiance know his actions or words triggered something from my past makes it a lot easier for us to work through. It's now us against the pattern or us against my trigger, not me against him. Because when you introduce something like this triggered me emotionally into the conversation, it's less about you did something wrong and more about I am sensitive around XYZ topic. So in the future, let's remember that. Or I just need reassurance from you here, or something like that. It's not like you did something wrong, you screwed up, you're at fault here. Because again, yes, they are accountable for doing or saying something that may hurt you, but you also have to take some ownership of your stuff too in that process. Again, it's both of you together against a thing, not you against each other. Another reason it works is that we have a deeper understanding and appreciation for each other. And this is my favorite part about sharing when I feel emotionally triggered with my fiance, because he gets to learn more about me and my past and why I am the way that I am. And he sees that I'm aware of these things and can know that I'm working on it too. He doesn't have to walk on eggshells around me. It's like a joint effort. And you might be thinking, well, what about his triggers? Listen, everyone's different. My fiance absolutely has emotional triggers, but they're not as severe as mine and they don't interfere as much with our relationship. And trust me, this is a two-way street, but I'm focusing more on my stuff and my experience in this episode because not everyone wants to go online and share with the entire internet about their emotional triggers. So we're not going to get into what his are, but everyone has them, okay? Finally, it allows us to build more trust. The more I openly communicate with my fiance, the more trust we can have. And the more he openly listens without judgment, the more confident I feel in our relationship. So it's like a cycle of trust and confidence in each other. And it just gets easier and easier to share because we're most of the time can meet each other with empathy, compassion, and understanding, not judgment, or blaming or anything negative like that. So, how can you try this? If you're in a relationship and you want to talk about your emotional triggers, I suggest bringing them up when you are calm, not super emotional. If you do have a moment when you're super emotional, you can say, "This is bringing up a lot for me right now, and I need to take a break for a little, maybe 10 to 20 minutes." Then we can continue talking. It's really important to set a time limit for your break so the other person knows that you have all the intentions of coming back and picking up where you left off instead of just sweeping it under the rug and never talking about it again. So then, when you're calm, you can explain what was going on beneath the surface, which is really all you're doing here. That is what communicating your triggers is. It's like, okay, you saw on the surface that I got angry or upset or I started crying. Below the surface, it reminded me of this thing from my childhood or did that. It was that thing that ex used to do or say. And you can be like, that's why I had this surface level reaction. So they know in the future that when they see you reacting to something that way, they know what's going on beneath the surface and they might respond to you differently. Of course, if you can't find the words or don't know how to explain it, that's okay. Do your best. And try to let your partner know that what they did or said that pushed you to the edge emotionally and why you think it affects you so much. From there, you can repair and start to talk about what to do next time. So, when it comes to anything around this topic of managing triggers, working through conflict, you have to accept that you and your partner won't always get it right. You won't always be able to do this. You won't always be able to tap into your emotions and like explain things and be articulate and all that stuff. And they might not always respond with the empathy and compassion that you need. So I know that even though my fiance and I have talked about some of our triggers, that doesn't mean we will be perfect at avoiding them all the time. And there's some grace here. We have the ability to self regulate our emotions. Not every triggered moment leads to a big conversation about it. And sometimes I can manage my emotions alone. In fact, I'm trying to rely on myself a little more before going to Johnny every time I feel really triggered. There's a certain level of responsibility we have to take for our own emotional wounds and past here. My fiance cannot heal my past wounds. He can't do anything to heal them. I have to do that work. He can be supportive, he can contribute to the safety and trust in our relationship, and he can be aware of my triggers. But ultimately, it's on me to know them and work towards healing, which is a super fun, never ending journey. My fiance and I had a great conversation during our Grand Canyon trip. And, Johnny asked me, when do we get to stop dealing with, the pain of our parents' divorces or something like that? And my answer was never. There are certain things that even if you work on healing them, new experiences will trigger them. And both our parents got divorced. So we can heal that, we can work on healing that, but then who knows if we have kids, things might be re-triggered. Wounds might open again. Fears might come up again because that's a new situation, a new experience. So just because you've worked on healing certain things does not mean that you will never feel triggered. Like, you need to learn how to manage this stuff. That's why it's super important to have these tools like checking in with your body, taking a break when you're emotionally flooded, and being able to tell your partner when you're feeling a certain way so that you can work through it and they can support you. But I just thought that was an interesting thing that he brought up. Was like, "So when do we get to stop dealing with this?" And I'm like, "That'll be nice." But my belief is probably never, or just kind of ebbs and flows, right? You have seasons of life. Maybe some seasons you're going to feel more emotional about certain things than other seasons, right? That's kind of how life goes. So another question that comes up is, am I settling if I get triggered in my relationship? And my answer is no, absolutely not. I know I would feel triggered by certain things in any relationship because all this stuff exists inside me. It's not the other person's fault. It's my stuff, right? What matters is that my fiance is empathetic, understanding, and accepting. Those are the three most important things to me in the context of this. Unfortunately, I don't feel triggered often in my relationship. If it was a constant daily or weekly thing that caused me a lot of anxiety, like it was in my last relationship, that would be a bigger issue. And that is worth looking at. And that is a situation where you might consider leaving because you want your relationship to bring you more peace than anxiety. So, no, I am not getting triggered every single day. We're not talking about this every day. In fact, it's getting less and less as time goes on. I would say I felt more emotionally triggered when we moved in together, when we got engaged, when we started planning the wedding. But again, it's every time we go through something, it gets better after that, not worse. And that's a great sign. So, in general, to wrap it up, being aware of your triggers can be a game changer in a relationship. You go from believing that someone is intentionally hurting you to realizing that they're not, but you feel hurt because their actions or words trigger old wounds, traumas, and fears. Some of the hurt comes from stuff that happened a long time ago, and that has nothing to do with them. And that doesn't let them off the hook, but it's your responsibility to know your triggers and be able to communicate with your partner so that they are aware of them too. If you have any questions about this, please DM me on Instagram at dating.intentionally. Leave a comment below if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. All right, let's get into some wedding questions. This personal update is just wedding focused. Thought I'd get it all out of the way. So if people ask, they know what episode to go to. All right, the first question is, what has been the most difficult, stressful part of planning so far? That would definitely, there's two things that came to mind. Well, three actually, sorry. Catering was weirdly stressful to figure out. It's just hard to find a caterer because our venue doesn't have built-in catering really. So we had to find an outside caterer to bring in. And just that was stressful. Tasting, finding people don't respond. And our venue isn't like in our town. So we've had to drive a couple hours to get there. It was just a lot. We found someone great who I'm really excited about, but it was definitely a big important piece to lock in that took longer than I thought it would. The second thing is logistics, because our wedding is kind of, again, not in our town, it's a couple hours away. My family lives on the East Coast, my friends are on the East Coast, people are flying in, and just, like, all the logistics of that is stressful. There's just a lot of moving parts, but that's okay. We are good planners, so we'll be all right. And the third most stressful thing is definitely figuring out what to wear for all the different things that we have, from like welcome events to the reception and the party. Like, it's been tough. I already have my wedding dress like for the ceremony, and that is great, but I don't have anything else. And we're 3 months out, so I'm definitely getting a little stressed about that because I'm really picky and I've ordered so many things. I just haven't liked anything yet. So, wish me luck. Second question. How are you doing things differently? So, yes, I've mentioned a few times that we are having a pretty non-traditional wedding. There's a lot of things we're not doing. We don't have a wedding party, no bridal shower. We didn't have an engagement party. We are doing bachelor and bachelorette parties though. Like, it's basically just I'm doing a girls' night out in New York City. Johnny's doing a boys' trip locally here in California. There are no destination bachelorette parties where people are spending thousands of dollars. That stuff makes me sick. The bachelorette culture in our country makes me sick. Like, just spending that much money. If that's you, great, but I'm not participating in that. Like, my bachelorette party is gonna be one night in New York City, not a whole weekend, and I'm paying for the whole thing. What else? We are doing a very small ceremony with family only on one day, and then we're gonna be doing a bigger party with all our friends and extended family on the next day, because I don't know how people do it all in one day. Like, I am the kind of person who goes to bed at 10 every night, and I get really tired. I'm honestly worried about staying up for the party, like, through the through the whole party. I'm definitely stressed about that. But yeah, we are basically splitting it up into 2 days because there's just no way I could power through a morning of, like, getting ready and the ceremony and then all the things and then a reception that's probably gonna go till, like, 3 in the morning or whatever. Just not for me. We are having a reception at a bar. So we're renting out a portion of the bar, which is like it's kind of outdoors, but it's covered. So if it rains, it's really not a big deal. And we're not doing a first dance, no parent dances. Honestly, my dad isn't even coming to the wedding, which is a whole other thing, and it's fine, but he will not be there. No bouquet toss, no cake cutting moment. It's really just going to be a bar hang with live music for the party. The bar that we are having our wedding at, they have a live band every weekend, but it changes, like, we have no idea what kind of music it'll be, but hopefully it'll be good. What else? We did digital save the dates, we're not doing a registry, just a honeymoon fund. We are not doing an after party because our venue said we could stay as long as we want, as long as we are well behaved. No rehearsal dinner, and what else? Oh, and this isn't necessarily different, but we are getting a prenup. So that's something that I think some people choose to do, some people don't do. We are definitely doing it. Generally, I'm very excited to have a low-key wedding and opt out of a lot of things that I find very meaningless. Because your wedding, you can do it however you want. You don't have to follow these traditions, and you're definitely saving money by opting out a lot of these things. All right, next question. How do you both make decisions when you have different opinions? So it's pretty easy. It's like whoever cares more, right? Like, I want a musician at the ceremony, and Johnny wasn't super jazzed about that, but he doesn't care enough to say no. Like, if I'm like, I really want a musician, we'll get a musician. It's not a big deal. I wanted pizza at the reception, and he said we could do better, which I'm like, what is better than pizza? But okay, we're doing something else. Also, I wanted to elope, and I didn't wanna have any celebrations, I just wanted to do a honeymoon, but he wanted to have his friends and family, and I'm like, "Cool," so we compromised on what we're doing. This hasn't really been a big issue, like, we haven't run into anything where we both are both really stubborn. I think we both have pretty easygoing personalities and just want the planning to be easy, so nothing's like, "I have to have this," and my fiancé doesn't agree. It's been pretty easy. Someone asked what the most surprising cost has been, like the biggest cost that was surprising, and honestly, I don't know if this was a surprise, but the biggest cost is easily the photography. But I think the photography is worth it because that's the one thing you're going to keep forever versus other aspects of the wedding, but, yeah, we definitely the photographers in the Bay Area are not cheap, but you know what? The ones we got are really good, so I'm excited. How did you figure out who to invite? Our rule was that we only invited people that we have seen in person in the last 12 months, with a few exceptions. So that ended up being about like 60 to 70 people on our guest list. And I assume like 50 will show up, maybe less. I don't know. But yeah, I'm really happy that it's going to be small and intimate. When did you start planning? So we started planning about 2 weeks after we got engaged because we knew we wanted a short engagement. It's only going to be a 9-month period of planning. And we are 6 months into that. Oh my God. All right, two more questions. How much is Johnny participating slash leading in the planning? Well, Johnny's been incredible. Okay, I've heard some absolute horror stories of grooms who are uncooperative, passive, stubborn, dragging their feet. That is not him. He has been the best. He made us an amazing spreadsheet to keep us on track, and you know I love a spreadsheet. We have tasks assigned to each of us, and we basically look at the spreadsheet every other week to figure out what we still need to do. He's just on it. I don't have to nag him. I don't have to remind him. He just does it. We're both leading different parts of the wedding. Like, he's figuring out certain things that I'm not even involved in, and I'm figuring out certain things that he's not really involved in. So it's been really nice. He's a great partner, and I honestly think planning a wedding is a great test of your relationship, right? It's like a group project you've gotta do together, and it's been fun. And the last question is, how did you decide the budget? So we both threw out some numbers when we first started planning that were comfy, and it's definitely more than what we thought it would be, but it's fine. It's still a fraction of what a lot of the average couple spends on their wedding in America. I do have some help from my parents who are really generous, but even without their help, we would be able to cover the whole thing. We are not going into debt for our wedding. That is rule number one. We're not throwing it all on credit cards that we can't pay off. I had set money aside for it, like, so is Johnny. It's really important to not go into debt for your wedding. So yeah, if you have any other questions, I am happy to answer them on Instagram at dating.intentionally. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting me. I hope this episode helped you reflect on your emotional triggers and how you manage them. Don't forget, you are doing great. I'd love it if you share this episode with someone who is navigating dating and might need a little confidence boost or some tough love. If any of these episodes have helped you in your journey, you can help me by leaving a stunning review on Apple or giving Dating Intentionally 5 stars on Spotify or following on YouTube. I'd really appreciate it. Once again, I'm Talia. This has been Dating Intentionally, and I'll catch you next time.